Welcome everybody to our session, Migration to SharePoint Online, Best Practices and New API. My name is Michael Jordan with Microsoft. I've been there about 15 years. I'm the Director of Business Programs. I'm going to be talking more about the process up front, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joe and Simon over here. So this is Joe.
My name is Joe Newell. I'm a solution architect with America's Cloud Services. I focus on helping my customers migrate to SharePoint Online.
Oh, no mic? Here we go. Hi everyone, my name is Simon. I work in SharePoint On-Prem and SharePoint Online, also OneDrive for Business. I'm in the product team in Redmond for Microsoft. So today I'll be talking to you about the API and everything. So we'll start with Joe, actually.
Yeah, with me, Mike. Yep. Okay, good. So let's get going here. Objectives today is we're going to make a new announcement about the API. Simon from the product group, all the work that we've been doing there. We're going to look at the process and the methodology that you need to think about when you are going to be migrating from on-premise to SharePoint Online. And then we're going to talk about some of those best practices as well. So basically the agenda, I'm going to cover the first part, which is the pre-migration, the thought process that goes behind the lift and shift, or however you want to approach this. Then we're going to hand it over to Simon, and he's going to talk about the new API that is that's going to be announced today. We're going to hand it back to Joe to do the best practices and all the supporting activities to support the new API that comes out. And then we're going to hand it back to Simon, who's going to talk about the actual PowerShell tools and give you a demo of actually how this works. And again, for the guys just arriving in the back, there's plenty of seats up front if you need to come and walk around here. So let's talk about the pre-migration and kind of set the context for where we are now. Over the last few years, we've been looking at onboarding and how do we get customers into our service. We've been using CSOM, an API, and we've been trying different approaches. There's a lot of reasons and why we were limited in some of the aspects. However, there's a bigger thing than around onboarding into the cloud, because there's a change of mindset. This isn't the old SharePoint where you do a DB attach or an in-place upgrade and you put some hardware there, you run some scripts, you start it on Friday, you come in on Monday morning and everything's up and running. We're now moving to the cloud, and this is pretty disruptive in the types of choices that we make. At the same time, companies that are doing modernization aren't only looking at SharePoint as a farm that needs to be upgraded. They're looking at the entire corpus. There's collaboration sprawl across multiple different vendors. They have Documentum, they have Google, they have SharePoint, they have files, they have laptops, they have public folders on Exchange. And when they're going to now move and adopt this cloud strategy as a single endpoint service, how do they consolidate this IP and content and actually put it on SharePoint Online? So it becomes more disruptive in the multiple choices that you have to make. With the so you see the ECM sources, we've always been struggling around SharePoint file shares, public folders, CMIS, our content management information service, and Lotus Notes has always been a big one over the last few years. Then we get into the delivery services, is how do you now isolate or categorize this content that needs to move around productivity apps or their business apps? What's your lifecycle management going to be with full trust code, and is it supported in the cloud service? Your data lifecycle management, and then the hosting platform that you go to. So we walk most of our customers through this process of thinking this isn't an in-place upgrade on the weekend like you used to do SharePoint. You have to sit and actually think of your entire strategy. And the disposition rules around the 5 R's becomes a key one around, are you going to retire? Are you going to retain, replace, rehost, or rewrite? These are 5 key things that the content owners need to think about when they're going to move. For the simple reason, you cannot take a content database where it is and just put it into the cloud multi-tenant. You can't just shove it up there and ingest it and it just lights up. The target platforms becomes an interesting one. Now you have multi-tenant, there's a service description, there's some restrictions around what can go in, there's some business process reasons of why things can't go there and where they need to be, or maybe there's data privacy where you need to retain it on premise. And then we have OneDrive for Business, we have SharePoint apps, we have SharePoint Online, and full trust code doesn't run in in a trusted environment. So like multi-tenant doesn't trust that code. So it goes to Azure provided hosted, or it could go to some other provided hosted source. So by taking your whole corpus of SharePoint and retracting full trust code and your content, it goes in two different directions, and how do you wire them up? So there's a thought process behind this. A key one where we start off is the question is, how much is it going to take and how long is it going to take? Those are two key questions that Microsoft's always asked. We really, from a pre-migration perspective, stress very important that we do an analysis of your corpus. We have to understand what you have. Most customers say, we know what we have, here it is, and when we get in there, we find out there's a whole bunch more that they haven't thought about. Discovery is a key one. We have crawling tools. If you have them, go and crawl, get a good knowledge of what your corpus is. Think of your discard date. The more data you want in your crawl, the longer it's going to take for this crawl to run. So for an example, we had a customer where we thought we could crawl their entire corpus in a weekend. They had maintenance windows. We could only run it on Sunday nights and during after midnight during weekdays. And they wanted to go back 10 years and add a whole bunch of elements to that crawl. It ended up taking nearly 4 months just to get that data back. So understanding your discard date, your maintenance windows for running these crawls, and then a key one is to get those reports out that you can actually have a look at. From there, we move into the assessment. And here we want to look at what is the inventory, what is the complexity and scale of that inventory, and then start rationalizing of where it goes and what is the target. A key one here with this funnel, which is self-explanatory, is that from this discovery and assessment, we always have what will be migrated and what will not be migrated. It's not a lift and shift operation. Don't have an expectation you're going to take everything you have today on premise and just put it in the cloud as is. And when we start looking at the durations as well as the cost to actually move this content, this purple box at the top may equate to $500,000 in services work or 6 months of time. And when we come back and we talk to our customers and say, we will move all of this content over, it's aged, it hasn't been used, it hasn't been accessed, you forcing us to actually move it over, do you have a check for $500,000 and we'll do it for you? And they say, well, that isn't worth $500,000, let's skim it off the pile. So there's multiple ways of actually going through this rationalization process and putting a monetary value or a business value to moving this over. And then when we do migrate the sites, we look and the content, we're looking at what is the easy stuff to do as from a velocity perspective and just ingest that. Then we have the high impacts and the exceptions where we need more of a white glove treatment around those. And that's very important when we do the assessment to start categorizing the content and what you have by high value and low value so that we can get them on the right velocity trajectory. Joe's going to talk more about the actual sequence and drill down into this. We call this the collaboration triangle. At the bottom, we have the security, metadata, folders, and files. That's pretty much what we're talking about today as far as content goes. Base has been doing some talks this week around the pattern practices, the Office 365, and the full trust code retraction for SharePoint. That's pretty much the code that's at the peak of the triangle. So when we look at content migration, if you're going to move content, it's quite disruptive. If you want to move this entire triangle over, you have to start thinking what the building blocks is and what the right sequence. On the left-hand side, we talk about the service management. What is the governance, the policies, procedures, enforcement for the new service endpoints that you're going to be migrating to, and the consideration if it's going to be on Azure, on SharePoint, and how that is going to be changing the way that you're going to be doing this migration. Next slide here. This more is a logical view of the migration process. Think of, you must have a methodology, whatever it is that you want to choose, and these, I'm just going to call out the key points that are pretty abstracted away regardless which ones you want to use. As far as the implementation goes, very key to have a good planning in place, and Joe's going to highlight why as far as the pre and post events that you need to consider. You need to have good preparation. You have multiple targets that you're going to be going to, and you look at that SharePoint triangle. You've got code, you've got content, you've got workflows, you've got customizations, you've got information architecture, you've got governance, you've got data privacy, you've got technical limitations, you've got business limitations. You need to prepare for how this goes. Then we do the migration and the adopt. So that's pretty much how we control this implementation. As far as the process goes, focus, we have common patterns and practices. It's coming out on GitHub, and we're getting a lot of consolidation going around the best practices in the field that we're putting up there. And make sure there's an alignment and element mapping, and Joe will talk more about that as well, of why that's important. As far as activities goes, you need to figure out what your automation is and your tools. That makes a big difference. If you're going to do it yourself or you're going to get an ISV to help you, think of user adoption. This is going to be pretty disruptive in this new world, and make sure that when they do go to the cloud, that they have the expectation of what's going to be there. Information management and application management goes around the governance. Very important to have a good policies, procedures, enforcement of how you're going to be managing this new environment. And results is key. Sample and velocity migrations, it's not a lift and shift and something you do on the weekend. There's with velocity sites versus a high-value sites, you're going to be doing some samples, some POCs, and see how this works. And then the key one at the end, what is the migration and acceptance reports looks like? When are you done? You don't want to be migrating for 6 months and then find out after 6 months something was wrong and you have to start all over again. And Joel will talk more about the process of how we have checks and balances in place. So the goals for the process, understand what your current state is. Very important that you put a lot of time into that. Understand what your future state looks like. As far as your service endpoints, the migration path you want to take, and then a migration factory, because this is going to be a bit of an effort for an organization. Again, it's not a DB attach and just walk away and come back at the end of the weekend. Decisions you need to make: what is the service that you're going to be using? Where is it going to be hosted? What is the sequence you're going to do around full trust code content, as well as any business policies that may be in place? And then an estimation around the effort it's going to take and the duration. So this is pretty much a context for thinking about the all-app migration. And then I'll hand over to Simon now to start talking about the new API, and then we'll get back to Joe and talk more about the context. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. So, hi, everyone. So I'm really excited right now because I'm going to not only be able to share with everyone what I've been working on for the past 6 months, but also I think this is a big game changer for migration to SharePoint Online. So what we're talking about is a brand new API. Now, can I have the clicker? Thank you. So here's to give some context for everyone where we started off. We built a team, and the team was focused around, we know that a lot of people are looking at cloud as their next step. And we know that right now, if you were an ISV or third-party developer, there was no clear path to do a migration to SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. You basically had to figure out your CSOM call you were going to do for every file, for every version, create your list, everything. You do it yourself, basically. What we've done is we said, as people go to the cloud, we want to establish a clear path that is the way to do migration to SharePoint Online. So what we did is we said, let's start by the first thing. Let's put out an API that is the recommended way for doing migration to SharePoint Online. So here's the quick overview. I'm going to talk way more in detail about it, but to give everybody a summary, you can think of it about 4 steps. So there are 4 steps. The first step is the source. So your source, our API is agnostic of the source, but for sure the one we target is file share and SharePoint on-prem, actually, but it could be any kind of source. The second step, so the first step is actually you need to gather that data, because like Michael said, is maybe not everything you want to migrate, but make sure you have the full list of what you're trying to migrate. Second step is actually packaging it up for the API to understand. So we will talk about how to package it, but basically we'll create this package that contains XML files plus the files you're trying to migrate or the list item, and basically making it in a way that the API will be able to migrate. The third step is actually using Azure as a temporary holding place. Azure has a way bigger throughput than SharePoint Online. We're leveraging the scalability of Azure as the first place where we will put the content temporary there, because the last step is actually we'll use backend network that Microsoft owns to go fetch the content in the Azure service and put it into SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business. So basically, you can think of it as your Azure temporary storage will be the way for us to dump everything you have, all your package, your 100 terabytes in Azure for a temporary storage place, where afterwards you'll create a job that is a time-based job, but basically it's bots that are running in the back end that are not impacted our front-end user, and will simply go fetch the content in that Azure using the right SAS key that you provided, and will dump it in the destination that you asked for. So who are we talking, who is it targeted for? Anyone could use the API, but it's not for consumer base. It's mostly for IT admin, third-party developer, people who have knowledge about SharePoint, how it works, because creating the package requires some knowledge about it. Also, we talk about the source. On-prem and file share is actually the two sources that we know for sure are the greatest and best for the API. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for cloud-to-cloud migration or other scenarios. It just means you might have to work a bit more about the packaging. The API. So why use the API? First thing, the resources are dedicated for ISV and migration scenarios. So basically, those bots are purely there for doing migration instead of using CSOM that was conflicting with for like front-end user that were trying to do normal interaction with the service. Oh, okay. Second part is you might have heard about CSOM trawling that is happening in SharePoint Online. This thing is there to make sure that our front-end user always have the greatest and best experience. So right now, there's a limitation that is coming in for CSOM that is going to prevent people from doing bulk mass upload using CSOM. And the way we're counterbalancing this is using the new API, you won't get any trawling of any sort. Plus, the speed is way better, so I don't know why you would use the CSOM. Better equipped to scale to demand. This is important because now we can actually talk about doing petabyte migration. We can talk about 500 terabyte migration. For sure, a petabyte is still nothing to blink an eye of, but if you're going to do 100 terabytes, some people were thinking, I'm going to do this in 2 years. Now, 2 years is way too long for us. So with the new API, you actually were able to scale up to the demand and be able to talk about month-long or 2-month-long migration. So what about speed? That's the big deal. That's the reason people want a new API. First of all, I want to point out type of content does change the rate. So if you're doing a 2 gig video file or if you're doing a 10K content with a bunch of metadata, the rate will vary. Some content will be way faster if there's less metadata about it. Using backend resource. This is how we're achieving such a great throughput is we have backend resource using our Microsoft network to go fetch the content. And also, by the way, with Azure, you can ship drive to Azure. So if you don't want to, if you're in Africa and you don't want to use your network latency or anything, you can ship your drive to Azure, and we'll use our network to do the content fetching. Lots of small scenario that ISVs are great at, and that's where you can leverage the third-party vendors. Is depending on your scenario, there's always some tweaking you can do around the size of the package we're going to do, or what type of rate you want to target multiple site collection at once. So ISV are great for that, and that's the tweaking they can do to help the API. The 5x I'm putting there is very conservative number. As soon as you're going to go out, now people are going to be allowed to talk about the API, and every ISV we talked with, they actually see way faster speed than this. I'm not giving you a gigabyte per hour speed because it simply varies too much depending on the type of content, if you're doing a list item versus video files or etc. But the thing is, we're 5 times faster than CSOM before throttling. So as throttling going to come in, it's going to be even bigger. And 5 times faster is just us being conservative because we're still at the early stage. The flow. So as a developer, you're going to use the API. What you should think the flow is going to look like actually. So the first step is actually going to be to create the package. The second step is going to be uploading it to the Azure Blob Storage. Like I said, there's multiple ways you can do this, in either shipping a hard drive or actually doing it through a network. There's going to be still one CSOM call, and that is basically the equivalent of your start button. So as soon as all the content is in Azure and you're ready to get ingestion, you'll basically submit one migration call that has no delay because it's only going to reply to you a GUID, which is what you're going to use as a tracking number basically for your ingestion. I'll go more in detail about that part. After the fact, once you submit your package and basically from there on, it's our job to fetch your content, the way you're going to be looking at it is you're going to be looking at the Azure query, which is going to be providing you real-time feedback on what is happening and what file are we ingesting. At the end, also, we will be providing a log file which has everything that has happened with date stamp and what failed or what not. More in detail about the creation of the package. Creating the appropriate XML to migrate your content. This is already published content. We're using basically what was called the Prime API in the past. It's a bunch of 8 XML that are on MSDN you can look up. We'll probably refresh them with the API. We're using a subset of it. So basically, this is huge, and it's also used for SharePoint export. So if you're using SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013, you can do ASP web export, and it will generate that package. The 8XML plus the content, the way you create the package is going to maybe help your speed or not, because if you don't include a bunch of metadata associated with it and you say, I just want the files to come in, it's going to actually be way faster if you put, we do preserve permissions, we do preserve any basic metadata, we don't preserve taxonomy yet, and we don't preserve workflow or active event handlers. Now, things that are important in this is we are actually preserving the document ID. So this, as a developer, preserving the document ID for migration is huge because it allows you to do a way better job at trying to make it look as it was in the previous environment. So that's for SharePoint for sure. And the other thing is, like I said, we do preserve permission. So even for file share, if you add file share permission and you're trying to migrate it into OneDrive for Business, the sharing and the permission associated with it will be still there. Date modified, last modified, and everything, date created. So upload to Azure, the blob store. What is happening once you upload to Azure? So the way we're looking at it is you're going to have your Azure blob, your Azure account, and in it, for each package, you'll need to have 2 containers. So people who are familiar with how Azure works is you have blob container, you have Azure Queue, you have Azure Table. The type that we're using for the content is going to be Azure Blob Storage. And we're using one blob container for the content and one for the manifest. The reason for it is actually permission-wise. We will never accept someone giving us access to modify the content. So the content, your files and folder, will never, if you submit us a SAS key that gives us access to modify it, we'll refuse it. We'll only use a SAS key that only gives us access to read it and to put it into SharePoint Online. The manifest is the one that we need write access to because that's where we're going to read the XML and we're going to post back the logs and the error files. The queue is the real-time queue. This queue is separate from the package because you can reuse the same queue for multiple packages. So for example, I'm doing a bunch of users. Let's give an example, 100 user. I have 100 packages for those 100 users, but you can use the same queue for all of those packages. The CSOM call. So as you're seeing right now, I'm not going to go into specific. It's going to be on MSDN when it's live. And basically, you can use that CSOM call. The parameter it takes is we need the web ID. We need the container source URI, the container manifest URI. Those are SAS keys that I'm talking about, where there's more specific about how to provide us the SAS key. It's going to be posted online. And also, there's Azure Queue report. The last parameter is optional. So if you don't want to use Azure Queue because you don't want to have real-time update, you're just going to let it run, then you can skip that last parameter. The queue in the log. So I was talking about the queue, how you can get real-time updates. So basically, you'll get an event, then because it's timer-based, normally if there's no jobs in the queue, it might take up to a minute for the job to actually start kicking off and starting to migrate. So what is happening is you're going to get an event that's going to tell you when the actual job got started. You'll also get a per element update, and you'll get a job completed or error or anything that happens in real time with maybe a 4-second delay. The log is stored in each manifest container, meaning error files, log file, and warning files. The log file is the full complete one that you want to look at. Then if you want to have only the subset of only the errors, then that's why we have the error in the dot warning. Those ones should be able to just export them in Excel, and you'll be able to see it through a spreadsheet. So one thing before I go to Joe Newell. So I've been talking about the API. We've been working in partnership with a bunch of people giving us great feedback. We actually use it in live scenarios. And that's why I was so excited to come here today, because I can tell you, as I was talking to you, we've been turning on the API live in worldwide. So as soon as you go out of this room, you can use this API. So. Joe.
So that's fantastic news for those of us who've been suffering through SharePoint Online migrations for the last several years. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And much of what the API addresses is about the ingestion of the content, extracting and ingestion of the content. But the truth is, a migration is so much more than that. I tried to think about it last night as I was preparing for this session. What kinds of migrations don't involve preparation work? And the answer was I couldn't come up with any of them. The truth is that some form of generic assess, remediate, migrate needs to occur every time. You need to understand your data, and this is sort of building off of where Michael started. Understand your data. What do you have? How are you going to move it? Right? The easiest data to migrate is data you don't migrate at all. And then coming from that, what are your issues that you're going to have to solve, and how do you know what those issues are? So much of that is dependent upon the tooling that you use. What tool sets are you going to use? What do you need? What kind of fidelity are you going to use? The truth, today we've got 4 different vendors who have implemented a new API so that to make it easier for you as a consumer to migrate content to SharePoint Online. But the API doesn't support all types of content. So there's still going to be challenges as you move through this process. So coming from assess, you've identified, hey, we think these are the issues that we need to address. Moving into remediation. Remediation is split between pre-remediations and post-remediations. The pre-migration remediations are remediations that are focused on, A, the fidelity. Are we able to migrate these things at all? And B, what do we need to do to be able to get the speed we want? What do we need to do to be able to finish this migration in something under 2 years? Building on that, there's some very obvious ones. FTC. What are you going to do with the FTC? How are we going to do it? How are we going to handle that? When we think about FTC situations or customization situations, it's about, can I still consume this content without this customization? Or do I have to have it? That's sort of the criteria when you how we move forward. Can I consume the data? That is the priority number one. That's the number one important thing. And then finally, there's obviously, and there's about 100 of them, there's obviously like the large lists. There's preparation of the environment with the managed metadata, and finally, the IA. The IA will necessarily change. When you go out into SharePoint Online, the URLs are going to be different at a minimum. So what is that going to look like? How are you going to build that? How are you going to be prepared to take advantage of these new capabilities with the new API? The truth is you're going to have to build the site structures. You're going to have to build those libraries. You have to have the container of where they're going to go. And you should be figuring that out prior to the migration, so that when you move into the migration, it's almost a formality. You've already figured out the lion's share of the problems. And now we get to move into the migration and begin to create those job designs, sample those job designs specific to your tool, because you're gonna have your tool, you're gonna test your tool, and you're gonna test it again, and you're gonna validate it again on different types of content, so that you know exactly what's gonna happen from it. You build those jobs, and then you get to take advantage of the new APIs. And now, you're really hitting the ground running at this point in time. If you've built out your IA, you've built out your site collections, you've got all your site structures, boom, we get to go. We get to go, and then we're going to say, let's do a pilot. Let's validate that. Let's bring the end users in. Who knows the content best? The content owners. We're going to bring them in. We're going to have them validated. Is this the way it's supposed to look like? Oh, no, not at all. We've got to try that one again. Finally, as you you go through that migration, you've got those items mapped, the permissions, the metadata, the templates get remapped because you're using something that doesn't exist anymore from 2007. Now we get into the post-migration remediations. There are some of these, such as scenarios where external data connections might be in your content, info path, Excel, things of that nature, that just flat can't be remediated until you're deployed. Maybe that app, that FTC app you wrote into the CAM model, now needs to be reapplied to the selected site collection. These are things that you can't do prior to the migration. You can prepare, but it can't be really applied until you're done. The rest of that a lot of gravy. What do I mean by gravy? I mean things like the UI. I need the UI to look exactly the same as it looked before. Is that damaging the consumption of the content? How important is that? We got to get the content. You have to have the content, and you have to be able to consume the content. The rest is gravy. So, to recap, when we think about a migration, we're thinking both of speed, of course, which we're getting huge enhancements out of. Huge enhancements out of with the new API, but we're also thinking about fidelity. We're also thinking about how does my tool work? Which tool have I selected? Does it support the types of content that I need? Do I need to do incrementals? Incrementals is a really big part of the process. Right now, there are ways to do it with the new API, but it's not through the new API, if you catch my drift. Finally, do you need an ISV tool? Simon's going to present to us some pretty cool stuff from the PowerShell commandlets. If you're moving content around, that might be just right for you. That might get you everything that you need. Or maybe you're doing a full-scale migration and you really would like to have that abstraction between what APIs are used and all of the content that you need to have. Finally, as we come through and we look at the success criteria of a migration, throughput's important. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's not important, because it is. It's probably the number one thing that I face on a daily basis with my customers. But there is more to it. It is more about the fidelity. Have you gone through phase gates for the content that you moved? Have you had the owners sign off on it? Make them sign off on it. Make them agree, yes, this is what I had. Here's your window. And by the way, if you missed the window, we're moving on, because the number one feature to a migration is finishing the migration. So, I really want to drive that point home. And I say that a little bit flippantly, but it's true. We don't want to get hung up on the minutia of it being exactly the same. Because for the lion's share of you, it's not going to be even kind of the same. Unless you're coming from 2013, vanilla out of the box, it's probably going to look quite a bit different. And so stay focused. Stay focused on the number one feature, and that's actually finishing. I'm going to turn it over to Simon now. He's got some really cool things that he's going to release to help you do some migrations.
Yeah, thank you. So, quick things. I've been talking about the API for a while, and then Joe came in and explained a bit more. Now, the thing we wanted to talk about is the API is great, but we know that some of our customers are not third-party developers. They're just IT admins who love PowerShell. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to answer everything, but I hope I can answer some of the folks' question about this. Before I go more in detail, we wanted to make sure we take two steps. I wanted to see if there was 2 or 3 questions about the API before we will talk about the PowerShell, because those are a bit two sides. So we have a question there. There's a microphone beside you if you want.
Covered this, but is there any ability using the API to do transformation? So if you're not doing a straight migration, so let's say, for example, in the current environment, you're not using document sets, but now you're going into the new environment and you want to, and there's some logic that has to kind of go into making that happen.
So technically, if you play with it, I believe you'll be able to do. Oh, I lost it. Okay. I believe you'll be able to do some sort of transformation. The way you're going to do it is actually using the XML, the packaging part. So when you're going to generate those XML, if it's something that you can tweak with, and maybe with the demo of the PowerShell, I'm going to try to plug that in with the demo of the PowerShell, but it's at the package generation that you're going to be able to tweak it if you want to tweak it. And I'm not saying everything will be, you will not be able to change everything, but some of that stuff you'll be able to tweak it. Is there another? Oh, and by the way, we got awesome SharePoint t-shirt for people who ask questions. Oh, sorry. Anyway.
Hi.
Hi there.
I have a question. When you talk about migration, are you talking about just data migration or workflow migration? And
So,
just to extend it a little bit more, you're talking about SharePoint to SharePoint migration, so 2010, 2007,
Okay.
2013.
So
Or
the
Lotus
question.
Notes.
Yeah. So the two questions, if I understand it, is it just content or is it more to it, like workflow you mentioned? And the other part is it only to SharePoint Online or is it to SharePoint on-prem?
It's SharePoint on-prem or Lotus Notes and other platforms.
Okay. So basically, first question, we're focused on content first, yes, but we are trying to plug everything that comes with content normally. And to be fair, taxonomy to me is a type of content. But like I said, we're working on adding added value. On MSDN, it's going to be written what we support yet, and there's going to be schema published that what is supported through the API. And the great part about an API is because it's a live service, we can continuously improve it and add new content that we support on top of it, and you'll just add it to your software afterward. Now, the other part about the migration, technically, like I mentioned, any type of source works. So if it's SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, Google Drive, Dropbox, it could work.
What about Lotus Notes?
Lotus Note, apparently there's someone, I think, trying it out under an NDA, but I have no clue if everything's matching what they wanted, but the content should work. Now, I don't know the extra about Lotus.
Thanks.
If you want a T-shirt, I know you're pretty far, but you can come get it after the session.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is InfoPath supported?
No, we don't support InfoPad. Technically, some of it, because we preserve the document ID, you might be able to plug it with InfoPad at some point, but honestly, I haven't tried that one yet. And we're in first release right now, so that's something that's further down the line. Thank you. We're going to finish that one and then do more questions. I said I was just going to, I wanted to see what's the top question that were coming out, because as I'm going to do this demo, I want to know what to talk about. So what we wanted to do is, ISVs are great, and actually if you want a full complete migration scenario, you probably should look at an ISV. But if you're an IT admin just trying to move your content from place A to place B, you should be looking at Microsoft to say, how can I just drag and drop my content, or how can I just mass migrate all my content into the service? So what we've done is, for IT admin who are used to PowerShell, we said we'll build a set of PowerShell commands that people can run, and those commands will run against FileShare and against SharePoint on-prem, and we'll be able to generate a package for you and then upload it, and I'll demo how it works. So, next slide. Oh, sorry, the clicker. So here's the 4 PowerShell commands that are going to be available. So the first PowerShell command is the new SPO migration package. This one is for FileShare, and what it does is basically taking the source target that you're giving us, and will generate a list of what we're trying to migrate. It's going to be basically a first version of the package. This is the equivalent of, in SharePoint, you can run an SP web export of a list, and it's going to give you about the same result. The second one is actually going to be the convert to SPO migration targeted package. This one is the one that's going to take your package that you initially exported from on-prem or you have from FileShare, and it's going to convert the permissions and basically the content to be ready for SharePoint Online. So if you're going to require a credential for the target destination, because it's going to do a mapping to the package and it's going to start converting it in a package in a way that SharePoint Online will be able to understand. Set SPO migrate. The third one, set SPO migration package Azure source. This one is basically an AZ copy. So what we're doing is you can take the content and it's just going to upload it to an Azure container. It's a simplified version of AZ copy because we're going to actually, if you don't provide us a container, we'll generate one for you. And there's added value to use it. But if you're really concerned about throughput, you can always use AZ copy, which is probably the best scenario for uploading to Azure. Submit SPO migration job. The last command. This one, like I said, is basically going to do the one CSOM call I talked about for package. And this one is your start button. So as soon as everything is in Azure, you submit the SPO migration job, and then we'll kick off everything to fetch the content back in. The result from it is this command will give you also a GUID, which the GUID is your way for tracking, okay, this was the GUID associated with the package I asked to migrate into SharePoint Online. So that's a bit like your transaction number. So I'm going to talk about the demo, and as I talk about it, I'm probably going to add some value to it. One thing to note for that's number 8. Yeah. For the API, one thing I haven't said yet, it's an overwrite API. So if you have content that is the same on the destination and you're trying to upload it, it's going to overwrite. Even if the date is better on the destination, it's an override API. So be careful when you're doing that. Make sure your content is virgin or ready to be overwritten. So what I'm showing there is basically I'm trying to do something. It's hard to do a demo that looks nice for PowerShell commands. And I'm going to try to do 500 meg in a conference internet. So I don't know how well that's going to go out. But so the first one, I actually did an export of the package. And then what I'm doing is the first one was basically the new one, but it was a SP web export. What it generated is it generated a temp package. Here you see a bunch of those are just logs, but the bottom part, those ones are the XML I talked about. So when you're generating that package, it's going to generate those XML as the first version. The second one is going to be the convert to. So as I run the convert to, what it's going to ask me for is basically, oh, did I lost internet access? Remote server turn. So yeah, I lost internet access. But one sec. So like I said, one of the things is you need to have access, as you're going to do convert, you need to have access to the destination site. So as I lost internet access, it logged me out, basically. So let me make sure that's the right destination. No, ergo convert. Convert to, here we go. So there's a bunch of parameter in it. It's going to be fully documented. What is happening right now is we had one parameter was basically the target web URL. That's why I needed the credential to get access to it. The second part is it asked me what was your source data and where's your package. At the end, there's a credential that I asked for. So it's basically resolving every object right now and making sure that they are ready to get ingested in SharePoint Online. Now, the internet seems to be a bit slower than I'm used to, but let's see how well it processes. So normally it's pretty quick. To give you an idea, I did a 300 gig package of files and folder and pictures. And creating the package and actually converting it took about 30 seconds. So I'm having way bad latency again. That's just the internet from here. And it's actually jammed. So I'll give you an idea of what's happening. So what it's going to do is it's going to convert, and normally it would generate the same 8 XML that is happening here. And what it will do is those 8 XML, if you open them, they will actually have changed the credential. They'll have changed the mapping for the permissions. So you can actually see what changed if you do a comparison of the two package. The great thing about this is if you're a third-party developer, you can actually use this and look at what the convert command does, and then you can use this as a base reference for you using the API. After that, what would happen is I would run the SP submit migration, which is the third command I talked about. This one is upload to Azure. So uploading to Azure right now, downstairs I was able to do it and it took about 30 seconds. Right now I don't think that's going to happen. So basically, uploading to Azure right now is about when I was in the corporate network, it was about 60 megabit per second. So Azure upload is way fast. So it's not our problem right now. The biggest part was actually once you do the submit migration job, you're going to have, I wish this one would work, but that's part of the deal. Yeah.
Should I turn internet sharing on my phone on?
Sure. Let me try to. So let's see. No, it's not. So I wanted to make sure. So as I said, you have your Azure container normally, and those, I have the photo files and I have the manifest file. Those were a previous, I'm not going to lie, those were a previous run I did. But I had those there already. And once it's there in Azure, the great part about it is, oh, come on, internet. So once they're there, you can actually look in Azure and look at your manifest. And in the manifest, if it was going to load, I would be able to show you that there's actually a log there for the previous job I ran. So the log there would show you every job, what timestamp that got happened and everything. Unfortunately, it seems like internet let us down today. And so the last part is, you see at the bottom, I have also an Azure queue. So that was my queue that I had there. You could literally just open that folder in Azure Explorer and see real-time thing coming in and like what is happening with the service. Right now, nothing seems to be responding, so one second. Let's try again. Yeah, I'll try disconnecting and reconnecting to internet.
What about network interruptions during the upload?
So during the upload, if you are using Azure Copy, they're pretty resilient about this. For our PowerShell command, we're trying to have the same resiliency as Azure Copy, but if you're concerned that your network is actually not that stable, I would recommend you to use AZ Copy. This is simply because they have been there for like a bunch of years now, and they're way more stable. As of FYI, all of this, so I'm going to go to the slide while I figure this one. If it happens, I'll do a quick demo at the end. But yeah, so it's a proof of concept that this doesn't work. So the API is live. This is stable. Third-party vendors are actually already using it and ready to use it. The PowerShell commands I was trying to demo to you, I gave you the big overview. It's an open beta. So as of now, there will be a post on basically on a MS blog or MSDN. And also you can go to the aka.ms.spo migration preview, and you can download the preview. So the bits are ready. They are there to be used. Now it's a preview. That's why we're in open beta right now. But that gives you an idea of what you prepare for doing migration. Also, if you're a third-party developer, like I said, you might want to look at the preview to have an idea of how to generate the package and everything. Third-party tools are ready for it, so I have to tell you, as soon as you're going to get out there, there's probably going to be people that are going to be pretty loud about it because they've been ready and they've been waiting for us to announce it. So there's ShareGate, Metalogix, MetaVis, AvePoint, all of them are actually working with us. Apparently, there's Dell also that's going to be ready for it. So all of them are actually ready for the API. So they were just waiting for us to announce it, and then they'll say what is going to happen with their product, how they will get the updates for it. Every product are going to have their announcement there. So like I said, third-party vendors are actually great if you're trying to full-fledged migration, like for example, you really need taxonomy or something like that. That's where they're going to add value to our API. Integration with O365 admin. This is probably the next session you want to attend. If you have questions concerning the Azure account or the way that O365 as a whole is going to do migration, we have a session tomorrow at the same time. I'm going to be co-presenting with people from the Exchange IP team. And basically, they're going to talk at a higher level, what is Office 365 migration all up? And we're going to talk about the Azure container and everything about this. As of now, if you want to use the API, you need to provide your own Azure account, but that is something that we're working on. So from there on, those were the great announcements I wanted to tell you. So please download the preview, give us feedback about the preview for the PowerShell commands, and also use the API because that is probably 10 times better than what you were using with the previous commands. So I'll start with question now. Oh, I'll figure that one after. Yeah. Sorry, this guy was lifting his hand, but yeah.
Is this all supported with dedicated tenants?
Yes. So the question was, is it supported with dedicated tenants? Yes. We will use the same API for dedicated tenants.
vNext, though, right?
Yes. So whoever we're asking a question, I'm trying to remember the face, but feel free to come pick up your shirt afterwards. Yes.
I was wondering, do we have to worry about the Azure Data Center location we pick?
Yes, Azure Data Center is actually important. Don't pick one in Australia where your content is maybe in Europe. If you call us, or actually there's a way to easily find out where your data center for SharePoint is. And if you pick the same data center for SharePoint and the same data center for Azure, you'll get actually a way better speed again. It doesn't mean, so there's the trick there. If you're on a place where there's very poor internet connection, you might want to take the Azure network the closest to you, and then leverage the fact that Azure connection with Microsoft is actually way better. So that's something you can play with.
And how about Azure storage costs, ingress, egress?
Azure storage costs, that's a great question. Like I said, we're going to give more detail about this tomorrow at the session with Exchange IP team. But as of now, yours is about, I believe, 4 cents per gigabyte per month. So if you're using this for only a few days as a temporary holding place, it's practically free unless you're doing petabyte of stuff. And perfect.
Hello.
Yeah, there's a question there.
How to migrate, how to create this temporary package from 27 or 2010 form? I mean, how it saves all the image files and everything, like video files, it saves everything in...
So like I mentioned, basically in SharePoint on-prem, you had this command that allowed you to export content, and it was allowing you to export it and import it into another SharePoint on-prem environment. We're basically using that package that is generated when you run this SP Web Export. There's documentation on MSDN on how to use the command, but you basically do an SP Web Export on the list that you wanted to move, and you'll get the exact package you need, and then you run a convert.
So this supports both form level backup, site collection, everything, in all the levels?
So this is more at a site collection level.
Okay, so you need to do for each?
You can come after. I can see what's your detail about your question. I'll try to help you out. Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question. Would this API support exporting web parts?
No, we don't support. So the question is, do we support web parts? No, we don't support web parts as of now.
Even if it's out of the box web part, like content editor?
Even if, as of now, we don't. We know about this. It's a bit like workflow. It's a bit like taxonomy. We don't support it as of now. But again, this is V1, and as we work with the API, we'll improve in what we can support with it.
And so all of the CSOM-based migration approaches still apply. And so what you're going to end up with in a large-scale migration is some version of the two coming together. So highly optimizing for throughput with the migration API, and then filling in the gaps with the CSOM approach.
Thank you.
There's a question in the back. I'll try to do a few.
Is there support for writing previous versions or doing date-based migration? So you can do either differentials or legacy differentials for very large migrations. I can't hear what he said.
So you talked about differential from legacy versions.
Not legacy versions, but let's say you have a site with that's 500 gig, but 400 gig of that is previous versions that they need to retain for whatever reason, but they don't want to migrate that initially because it's...
Version history, you're saying?
Yeah.
So we do preserve version history. Now, if you don't want to bring it in, that's at the package generation, that's where you can actually say, I'm going to scrape off the 500 one that I didn't want. But by default, we do preserve version history.
So, and there's still, so it still does take time to ingest that content. So I do always encourage my customers to really think about what they actually need to have when they migrate. Version history is one of the top items that absolutely creates bottlenecks.
Not quite my question. So they want to migrate, let's say, the first 20% of that initially because that's the data that they're most likely going to be using in the near term, but over time they need all of it. So is there a way to write that legacy data in after the fact without overwrite?
So for that scenario, I would argue either you do some cleanup and you prepare it in the right way, or you go with a third-party vendor who can actually do incremental and delta for this. The API by itself doesn't do delta yet. The API, that's where the third-party vendors actually are better at managing that content. If you want to split it up, they'll actually have UI for it so you can see what you want to bring in, what you don't want to bring in. The ISV are loving it because even if we give PowerShell to people, there's still going to be scenarios like you mentioned that requires a bit more love. So that's one that I would recommend for you to just talk with the ISV booth and see what they can provide to you.
Right, so it's not, while it's, what do you call it, overwrite?
Yeah, it's an override API. So
it doesn't mean that you can't do incrementals. It just means that with that API, you're blasting it in and you can come back and do an incremental with the CSOM-based approach.
Yeah, it has to be a forward-looking incremental.
We're going to rotate to the other question. Sorry. Over there?
Yeah, so to dovetail on the version history, that's great that we've got that, and we can kind of go over and over and over again if we want to tailor that to what we need. I guess, is that correct right there?
Sorry, because you're talking about incremental, basically you're saying you want to, like as people are using it, you want to add version history. Actually, the way that the Prime package works is great for this. What you can do is simply upload the new part in the Azure storage and then just submit a queue and we'll pick it up from there and add the new versions on it.
Gotcha. And what about approval history on things?
Sorry, what?
What about approval history? Like just for audit purposes, if someone approves something, we want to track that?
And when you say that, are you referring to specifically workflow history?
Well, not necessarily workflow, but just an approval that's something, for version history. I approved this to go to the next level from 1.0 to 2.0, and I want to make sure that I've got that audit history, that I can go back and take a look at that.
It depends where it's stored.
Yeah, so we're going to have to maybe come after, and those are the kind of question that is very scenario specific almost.
Okay.
So feel free to come by after. Sorry.
How are the user identities migrated? I mean, are we assuming that the same users exist in the Office 365 SharePoint Online as well?
Good question. So we require you to do an AAD sync. So this is something that if you want your permission to be preserved, we need to have the user in the cloud. So there's mapping you can do. You actually, with the PowerShell command, you can do either your own mapping, you can do your CSV file that is going to do your mapping, or you can ask us to do it for you, as long as the users are showing up in AAD. So that's why I recommend doing an AAD sync just to make sure that your users are there.
So there are some hooks where we can change the user. Like, for example, the format was first name, last name here. It changed to last name in the, let's say, something like that.
That is going to be, the only way you're going to be able to do that is going to be at the package level, where in the XML, every user is going to be there. You're going to be able to change that for that one. Like I said, you can provide a CSV file for the PowerShell command that is actually going to, you can do a mapping of like, this person is actually now this person.
Okay.
Yes?
Just a follow-up question. This new API, does it support chunk file upload for very large files?
Sorry, support chunking for a very large file?
Yes.
So as of now, we're still using the SharePoint Online limitation. So you have to be careful if you have a 20 gig video, it's not going to work in SharePoint right now. As the limit for SharePoint improve, we're going to use the same limits.
So no, my question was not that. So question is, if you have a 2 gig file, and can we chunk those 2 gig file into 50 meg packets and upload it to the Azure blob and eventually upload it to SharePoint?
The thing is, if it's one file that is over the limit, it won't work. If it's multiple files in one package and the package is 100 gig, yes, you can chunk it the way you want. But if it's one file that is too big for SharePoint Online, it's SharePoint Online limitation.
Okay, understood. So in this entire presentation, there's no link to the new APIs.
So it's going to be on MSDN. It's going to be SharePoint Online Migration API. It's going to, as I think people are putting it up on MSDN and also turning it out live. Because you're an Ignite attendee, you have access to the old deck, so you can try to do the CSOM call. That was one of the slides. The other thing is, give us a week to make sure that everything rolls out for documentation-wise. But I was told that today, as I was doing this session, also the documentation was being uploaded to MSDN.
Right, thank you.
It's an API on the tenant, so it's being added to all of the tenants right now.
Okay, thanks.
So does the API...
Sorry, I'm just going to ask this person. I'm trying to do a rotation.
Does it preserve if it's a checked out file? Does it preserve checked out?
Good question. So checkout files right now is on our backlog.
Okay. Yeah.
People at the...
Okay. I am an admin of a large-scale SharePoint environment. We're committed to going to Office 365 soon, but we have a large team of developers who love writing full trust code.
Yes.
What is like the best encouragement or advice I can bring back to them to prepare them for this move within the next 2 fiscal years?
Actually, Joe is better for that one, but...
So the best advice I can give is the easiest stuff to migrate is stuff you don't migrate at all. So one of the, when we go through this process, we do an assessment on all the FTC code that you have, and we go through and assign the disposition right away. And heavy emphasis on, can you do it out of the box? Can it be done configuration-based? Do you have to write an application? And really put the pressure on. Is there business value for this? You want to rationalize and whittle down that list to be as small as you possibly can so that you're getting the actual business value for the FTC that you have left.
Okay. Thank you.
Then write it.
Question on the back.
So does the API support all the social stuff, like a My Site, stuff in the My Site?
Yeah, actually, any destination in SharePoint or OneDrive for Business works, and the source, like I said, it could be anything.
It's basically depending on the ISVs and their
depending on the ISV
create
you're going to do, they're going to tell you what they support or not. And the ISV are all up with the API, and now they're trying to add as much sources that they can. Because basically, like I said, we're agnostic of the source. So as long as you package it in the right way, we will ingest it. So it's not source dependent.
Thank you.
But the PowerShell commands, although, is only file share in SharePoint. Yes.
Should the web application should be converted to claims-based before taking out, because of all the users should be claims-based, or it works out of the box? Say for SharePoint 27, if you take it and migrate it, it works straightforward, or?
So, to be fair, we went up to 2010. So we did 2010 and 2013 for the PowerShell command as attempt to do migration. Now again, it's an open beta, and you might find some issue with it if you're trying 2007. But feel free to try it out and give us feedback on the site. That is a scenario. Like right now, we're supporting 2010 and 2013, and we're trying to iron out every small issue with it. But for 2007, if we can support it and help out people, we'll do. Now, for the API itself, it should work.
So we don't need like claims-based or anything like that. It works with any kind of authentication with the users, right?
Not true. You need to have an AAD credential in the cloud. The source, the credential, so this is why the CSV file is so nice, is because if you're using a weird auth scenario that everybody has their own, you can actually generate that CSV file, which you do, here's my user mapping to this AAD user. But at the end of the day, if you're going to SharePoint Online, you need to have an AAD user.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Yes?
So a couple of related questions. The first one is, you mentioned like content. Does that include page content?
So to be fair, we're not in the business of migrating ASPX page or something like that. The reason for it is in SharePoint Online, actually, you should never customize your master page. That is the first statement, because you're going to end up in a weird ghosted place. Now, content, we're trying to take content very large, but the page itself with UI, it's not something we're looking at.
Okay. So again, you come back if you've got a publishing site, you've got a lot of pages out there, you can come back and use the ISV tool, CSOM approach, and still migrate those pages as you would today.
And so you would exclude them from the API approach. So you do all your like document-based content using the API, and then come back with an ISV tool for all.
So right now, what you would do is you're going to focus. This again comes into the preparation work. When you do your job design and you start to plan that out, you're going to want to be able to identify. So what are the candidates for the migration API, and which are candidates that are not? And so document libraries, you're going to be targeting those, and those are going to be jobs that you're going to configure to use the migration API.
Okay, so that's the related part of the question. So we have several clients that have large tagged libraries, and you mentioned taxonomies are not being included currently. If we were to use this tool, how would we come back and apply the taxonomy so that it ties back in with the content?
So the story is, if you use the API right now, you're going to do your migration, and then ISV tool has to use the old way they were doing for taxonomy. So that's why third party are great, is because everything that the API support, they're supporting it, and then afterward they're adding on top of it everything else that they used to do through CSOM. So CSOM throttling is actually going to be less impactful for them, because the big chunk is going to be done through the API, and then there's going to be touch-up that are done through CSOM.
Got it. Great. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. No, I'll go this way.
Hi. We have a lot of third-party products like Nintex workflows, multiple other products, web parts.
Yeah.
In an environment, because it's a large-scale SharePoint environment. So we are planning to go to Office 365. So will those products be supported by Microsoft?
So
Office 365?
Migration, like workflow in general, as a vague term, is pretty tricky for us to do a commitment. Now we're looking at that one, and things that are a bit trickier is you might start seeing some first version which doesn't support workflow history, but we actually support the workflow. But workflow is pretty huge, so supporting everything about workflow, and even like third party doing on top of it, for us is a pretty huge task. So I don't want to make any promises, but we're definitely looking at that area.
Are you specifically referring to the new API, or just in general?
In general.
Yeah. So I believe the Nintex folks are here, and I think they have some announcements coming. But they, historically, it's of course been a very big challenge for those of us that are heavily leveraging Nintex and then remediating them to get into SPO. But they're actively working on it, and I believe they have a session here somewhere that should lay out that roadmap for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I know they've been working with various tool vendors. I just didn't. I want them to say that as opposed to me.
So guys, this is Samir from Medalogix. Pretty much all the vendors are working with Nintex. We're working with them. Our Metaverse solution also supports the migration at this point.
To be fair to that question, just go at every ISV booth and ask them.
And talk to them.
So we're trying to not do publicity for one over another. Yes, ShareGate, Methodologics support that scenario. Go talk with them, and they'll probably have more info on that one. I'm going to go with the next question.
So could we leverage Azure Express routes to actually make the blob upload run a lot quicker?
So the Express route, like I said, is if you have mass amount of content and you're in a place where the network is not that great, you can use 4 terabyte drive that you ship to Azure.
Yeah, are you already doing that today, or are you asking if you should?
It's something that was recently announced. It's a dedicated connection between Azure and our on-prem network.
Right. I mean, so with Express, I mean, obviously you're going to get a much higher throughput in terms of bandwidth with Express route. The challenge is, how long is it going to take to set that up? What we do is actually take the content and ship it to Azure, and just attach it into a migration environment that way.
What's the timeline for doing that, the drive shipping? Is it
that's available
It's your
now.
FedEx timeline, and no, but
so honestly, we ship it on a Friday. It's usually in the environment by Monday afternoon. I mean, they're pretty snappy about it. You overnight it with FedEx. It works out okay.
Yeah, it takes 8 hours to do.
Yeah. By the way, the person in the back is the person I'm co-presenting with the IP name, and we're going to give more detail about the Azure scenario. So how to use your Azure account, how does O365 jump in that scenario, and what does drive shipping looks like for email or for a SharePoint.
It doesn't, and just to be clear, when I talk about the drive shipping, it's not into SPO.
Yeah,
it's just into the Azure environment to do whatever you want to do with it from there out.
Yes.
What about the site columns and the content types?
So site column and content type. We will support content type. Site columns, you have to generate them beforehand. So then we can do basically you can put them in the XML afterwards, and then we'll fill them up.
So you site columns first and then content types?
So I'll be cautious about this. Content type is very vague. There's a lot of stuff, but definitely most of it will work. Try the ISV tools. Those guys are probably pushing the limit for what the API support for content type.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So there are going to be guidelines published.
Oh, sorry, there's someone in the. We're trying to do a rotation.
Are there going to be guidelines published for when to use the API,
Did you ask
when to use a PowerShell?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Guidelines for when to use the API and when to use a PowerShell commands?
The guidelines is API is very stable right now. The PowerShell is in the open beta. The reason for it is we wanted to have a stable API before we started working on the PowerShell. So basically, API, we've done real data with real customer already, and it's stable. The PowerShell command, it's still in beta. So play with it, and we'll announce more when it comes out. It's not something that we're going to keep in beta for years. This is something we're trying to finish up in the next month to come to ship. There's someone in the back, sorry.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first one is there a difference between what we have for on-premises at the moment regarding the import-export and what we now have with for Project Online? And the second question would be...
wait, just for the first question, I heard Project Online, but can you talk closer to the microphone or a bit louder?
I'm sorry, SharePoint Online. This is Project Online is the second question.
Okay, so for SharePoint Online, what is the specific question?
Is there a difference between what we have now for SharePoint Online and what we had before regarding the import and export, let's say SharePoint list or SharePoint chat?
Yeah, so for SharePoint Online, the export didn't change. We didn't do anything about the export right now. So the API is purely for import. Now, for import in SharePoint Online, I believe you had I would say I don't know a lot about the previous way to do the import in SharePoint Online, except that you had to do it for every file by CSUM. The command import, I've never tried it in SharePoint Online, but that's something that, if you want a specific detail, just come after and we can talk about that one. But I would say there's no prior to this for import.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the second question is about Project Online. Today it was announced that the content of Project Online is going to be joined with SharePoint project in SharePoint goes to the same database. So is it supposed to be extended in this way?
So, like you said, those are fairly new things, and right now we don't do a. Sorry, do you have a comment?
There's a session on Friday.
Okay.
Brian.
So, session on Friday by Brian that is going to talk probably about that area a bit more.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, fine.
All right, great. So I'm listening to the questions people have been asking, and it seems that you're implying an order of operations in doing a migration.
Yes.
Where you first migrate the site structure, the document libraries, taxonomy, content types, columns with a third-party tool or through CSOM, and then come back and add the content.
Yeah, so basically, yes, there's an order of magnitude right now where the API is not a one-to-end, beginning to end story.
Right.
The API is for the content migration, but there's need to be an existing target. So that's what I mean, but there's a need for someone to creating the site, provisioning the site beforehand. The second part about taxonomy, depending on the way you're doing taxonomy, there's people who do it ahead of time, there's people who do it after the fact. Because
but if the taxonomy doesn't exist, how are the documents going to be tagged with the taxonomy?
So that's where we're working with once we're going to support the taxonomy part with the hidden list, that's going to be easier for us. But yes, normally we recommend people to do taxonomy first. And we are working with the hybrid team on a way to do an hybrid merge for the taxonomy. So that's why I said we're working on this, because once we're going to have a clear story for taxonomy, that's when we can come back and say what is the real story.
I understand. I'm just trying to be clear on your guidance for the order of operations right now.
Do taxonomy first normally.
Great, thank you.
In the back, is there questions? No? Okay. You have another question?
Clarification or follow-up on, we've got Windows Identity, our current farm. We're going to be doing a AD sync.
Yes.
Will it convert to the claims identities?
So, yes. So there's multiple. So when I say AD sync, there's multiple parameters you can put in it. It doesn't need to be a back to two-way sync. It could be just a basically upsync. And that part, if you're, I mean, every scenario is different, but make sure if your user get uploaded, get synced with AD, then everything would work fine.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think we're done with the question. Hey, thanks everyone.